I was flipping through all the latest photography news this morning, and what I've noticed is it's announcement time again. There are so many new cameras and lenses and softwares coming out right now, all of them trying to grab our attention and trying to figure out where we should spend our money. And, you know, none of us is immune to it, but I just feel like I can't spend any more money right now. And I think we're all feeling the pinch. The cost of living's gone through the roof over the last few years, and it just seems to be getting worse. And so I asked the question, why should we be tempted by all of these new products? Every new announcement is trying to grab our attention with some new feature that they think that we need. And to be honest, do we really? I find that as I get to be more of a serious photographer, I'm using less and less of these new funky features that the manufacturers are putting in. I'm looking at my basic exposure triangle, I'm looking at multiple exposures or high speed, shutter drags with flashes, all those sort of things that have been around for decades, if not since the dawn of photography. Um, Putting in a flash new feature doesn't really sway me anymore. Um, Perhaps if I was really heavy into macro photography, I'd be quite keen to buy a camera that's got automated focus stacking. But even then, I might just want that little bit more control of it anyway. Certainly, I would be looking at focus stacking, but I don't know if I'd want the camera to put it all together. And don't even get me started on computational imaging. I want more control, not giving more control over to my camera. The camera manufacturers will have you upgrade to each new model, and certainly brands such as Sony and Canon will be upgrading you every year if they could, and that is not cheap. In Australian dollars, we're talking $6,000 to $8,000 for a camera body, and I don't know about you, but I don't have that kind of money. I wanted to talk about the investment that I've made in my camera system and why I'm not looking to upgrade anytime soon. My camera, actually, I'll get the other one. This was my original Pentax K1 Mark II. This cost me about $3,500 Australian back in 2018. Now, I love this camera. It's been really, really good to me, and the imaging is fantastic. When I was doing my research into a new camera, this one actually came head and shoulders above everything else that was on the market. There were features on this camera that some of the more modern, more expensive cameras just didn't have. Now, they've all caught up, obviously, in the last 7 years, but it still holds up as a fantastic camera. So I don't need to necessarily upgrade. In fact, it was so good that I ended up with a second one. And I found this really handy because I was doing sports photography and I needed a wide angle and a long lens at the same time so I could quickly swap and change. It certainly had nothing to do with landscape photography, but I did find it really handy because when I had one camera shooting a time lapse, I've got the other camera where I can actually just shoot everything that I see around, and I'm not sitting there looking at my time lapse camera going, "Oh, I really want to take that one." So, a good reason to have two cameras and not really making my point of not spending too much money. But when you think about it, it was absolutely worth the extra money spent. Now, this camera, 3,500, this camera, 3,500. And then there are the lenses. So to start with, this lens here I bought 2 years ago. It's a 100mm macro. I've been wanting a macro forever. That one cost me about $800, so not overly expensive, um, but the quality was excellent, and I did get it on special because I think it was about $1,200. And then Let me put this up. And then I'm looking at all of my other lenses that I've bought over the years. So I want to just briefly outline how much each one costs and how old each one is. And so my trip to Japan recently, last year, I picked up this vintage one. That was about $400, 50mm absolute manual. Picked up this one at the same time, a 70mm full frame lens for, again, about $400. Thankfully, the yen was not doing so well against the Australian dollar, so that worked out pretty cheap for me. So they're the cheaper lenses, but then you start to get into the more expensive. This is my very first full frame lens. That was about $1,000 Australian, 35mm Sigma. Brilliant lens, barely even use it because the next lens that I bought was this one, which is a 15 to 30mm 2.8. That one was about $2,000. And because it goes to 30mm, a 35 barely worth putting on the camera, unless I wanted something really specific. And it is a marvelous, marvelous portrait lens. These two I got back in 2018 when I bought the camera body. And then the next year, so 2019, 70 to 200, which was $2,500. And in the meantime, which I don't have because it's away for repair, was my 24 to 70mm lens. Again, another $2,000. So I don't know what we're up to now. 2, 4, 6,000 plus the two bodies is $13,000. And then a couple of years ago, I think it was 2020, I picked up this bad boy, 150 to 450, $3,500. So already I'm looking at, what did I say? About 13 plus 3, 16 plus a 24 to 70. So $18,000 of equipment just here. Can you imagine then trying to trade one of these in, which won't get me much at all? That works if I'm upgrading to the Mark III, but if I was to get really tempted by a Canon or a Sony or, God forbid, a Fujifilm or a Leica, where the cost just blows up exponentially, but I also need to buy all the lenses that go along with it. That's just not happening. Not at all. There's a channel that I watch on YouTube called First Man Photography, and Adam, who runs that channel, he still uses his Canon 5D Mark IV, and he often talks about how good that camera is. And he's used all of the modern cameras, like Canon sent him an R5 Mark II, and he used that for a couple of weeks, but he's still gone back to his 5D Mark IV. And I'm the same with these cameras. This does everything that I need in terms of landscape photography. For sports, not so much. For the low light events that I do, this still comes out ahead. The speed is fine. The low light functionality in these is incredible. Like, I can get an autofocus in low light and the image will be crisp and the noise is low and all of that. So why would I need to upgrade to something flashier and more expensive? And the main reason why I'm making this video is because as photographers, all we need are the basic functions of a camera. There are so many people going back to film these days, and camera manufacturers are again making film cameras. And what does a film camera have that one of the modern cameras don't have? Well, a film camera has a lot less. In fact, what a film camera has is restricted functionality. And so you've got your ISO, which is built into the film. You can't even adjust that on film. And you've got your shutter speed and your aperture. And that is it. After that, you can adjust some lighting artificially, but that's all. And so, why haven't camera manufacturers brought out something that is literally a film camera, but with a digital sensor? Because that's where I'm getting to be at right now. I put my camera on a tripod and I set my aperture to get the depth of field I need. I set the shutter speed to allow the right amount of light in, and I hit the shutter release, and that is it. And then I go back to my computer and I make the adjustments that I need, and I don't do a lot, and that's my photo. Do you need one of these, which takes the photo, does all the processing inside, and leaving you kind of happy? Yeah, it's a nice shot. You share it with your friends, put it on social media, but you would never hang that up on a wall. While I appreciate the art form of film photography, I prefer to do the film photography with a digital sensor. And for that, I don't need to upgrade anything, not until the sensor finally goes. They're my 3 or 5 thoughts about the upgrade path that I don't think any of us want to take. Certainly, I don't want to take. What do you think about the upgrade cycle? Are you happy with the camera that you've got? In fact, put down in the comments how old your camera is and when do you see upgrading to a new model? And are there any models out there right now that excite you? Will you actually use those new features, or will you, or is it all just vanity saying, I've got this great camera and it does such and such and such and such, but hell, I just use the exposure triangle. I put it into full manual. I know this one was a little unusual, certainly outside of the box for me, but this has been something that's been ticking over in my brain for a while. Let me know your thoughts down below. Thanks for listening, and I'll have a bigger adventure for you next time.